That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Hello, and welcome back to your favorite podcast at the intersection of faith and fear, where every week, and especially this year, and especially this episode, we discuss what scares us in order to find what saves us. This is the fear of God. Speaking to you right now is one of your hosts, Nathan Rouse, and typically with me is fellow co-host Reed Lackey. And guys, he was here, guys and gals, he was here a minute ago, but he said he needed to go clean up his snack of peanut butter and Oreos, which is just not healthy. But I can't talk. I do love some peanut butter, so I'm not going to blame the guy for indulging there. In the meantime, allow me to welcome not just you, constant listener, but a very special guest back to the show, Friends and Foggers, the man with his own HBO series inspired by his work. It's Matt Ruff. Matt, welcome back.
Well, thank you for having me back.
Oh, absolutely. It's a thrill. Thank you for joining us in the middle and as part of this series called What Scares Us, a special series curated by the listeners focusing on films and media that stirred a fearful imagining in them and Mr. Ruff in you, because today we are featuring your submission for What Scares Us, which is super exciting. Hopefully Reed will be here in a minute, as I know he'll be happy to see you. As I am wont to do on the show, though, I'm getting ahead of myself, because here at the Fear of God, we explore. We don't explain, except for right now, when I explain that you, listener, when I explain that you, Matt, can listen to the Fear of God at your nearest podcast platform. You can watch the Fear of God on YouTube. It's consistent now. I promise it's there. And you can browse the Fear of God on the web at thefearofgodpodcast.com, where you will find Reed. Hey, welcome back to your own show.
I'm amazed to be here. I'm even more amazed that Matt is here.
Look,
Matt, oh my God.
Matt.
It's so good to
friend of the fog, Matt Ruff.
Oh man, thank you so much for coming back.
No, thanks for inviting me back. It's wonderful.
Awesome.
I felt like we should have preempted Matt for like just disappointment now. Like, previously he was like the star, we were starstruck. Now you're just one of us, so we're gonna burp apart in front of you and all that.
No, it's actually true. I feel like part of the family now.
Yeah, well, good.
That's awesome.
Good,
no, that's the way we want it.
The Foggin family.
Absolutely.
So we want to indulge a conversation with you, Matt, but Reed, before we do that, is there any specific business we need to tend to?
Nothing beyond the usual. In fact, though, I do want to say, if there's any who are still debating about whether or not to submit their What Scares Us entry, that time is growing short if it has not already eclipsed. In fact, next week's episode was a bit of a rapid fire late entry. So by all means, visit fearofgodpodcast.com, click on the banner on the top. You can submit your story for our ongoing series, which this episode is a part of, for hashtag What Scares Us. Other than that, come hang out with us. Join us in the Facebook group. Write us a review on iTunes.
And who knows? Like some folks of late, maybe you'll end up on the show. Yes,
not a promise, but maybe
leave an iTunes review, Matt. Leave an iTunes review.
Super subtle.
Listeners can't see that I was making really big winky eyes at Matt. Okay.
I think they actually might be able to see that, but
yeah. Well, yes. Just listeners. Yeah, it's true. It was that big. Good joke, Matt. I almost missed it, but I did pick it up there. So, Matt, typically, as you may know if you've listened to the show much, we will often do a what you watching, what you're reading, what you're listening to. But being that you're here, and last time you were here predated the release of the HBO adaptation of your book, I thought it'd be fun to just do a little mini convo about your experience with that. So one, just as a general kind of a launch pad for you, how are you? Congratulations. You had your work adapted for the old home box office. And what was that like?
It has been the weirdest year of my life, because it's been this thing where, yes, we're in the middle. First of all, there's the pandemic, there's the all the joy of the election season.
Sure.
Oh man.
The question about whether there'd be a country left after January, and but then at the same time, this has been the best year of my life professionally, where
It's like the best of times and the worst of times.
even the pandemic sort of eating the launch for my most recent novel didn't really matter, because partly because our good friend Blake Collier was there to help me out. We did a podcast, so I was actually ready to go online when everybody else was still scrambling to figure out how to do that. But then, the HBO series came out, and it turns out having HBO do an adaptation of one of your novels is like the best advertising campaign that someone else's money can buy.
I'm sure. That's so awesome.
That's fantastic.
So and it was just a the big question everybody asks is, what is it like to see your work adapted, and how do you feel about things being different? Because of course, inevitably, there's going to be changes made, and I was always like you guys, I'm an old time Stephen King fan. And so quoting James M. Cain by way of Stephen King, they can't ruin my novel. It's up there on the shelf and always will be.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
It's easy to say that, but until it actually happens, you don't really know how you're going to feel or how territorial you're going to be. And I was very pleased to discover, watching the show when it finally came out. And obviously it helped that I think they did an amazing job at the adaptation, but more than that, I was really willing to just go with it the way, and accept that it was a translation, not a carbon copy of what I did. And it wasn't, I would have been bored if it had been too close to what I did anyway. So I was fine with, the character changes. They gender flipped a couple of the characters, and they obviously made some big plot digressions, particularly in the latter half of the series. But and all of it basically worked for me. There were a couple of points where I had to watch an episode twice, like the first time to sort of like see what happened, because it would be like, wait a minute, you did what? You killed him? You really?
Right.
Now, out of curiosity, and it's all out there, spoiler alert if you haven't seen the series or read the book, but were you privy to any of those changes going in? Like, did you know definitively X, Y, and Z?
I knew that Caleb Braithwaite was going to become Christina Braithwaite.
Sure.
And I knew that Horace from the novel was going to become Dee in the series. So I knew about the gender changes, and I guessed about the secret of Christina and William being the same character. It's funny. I read the pilot script. They didn't tell me in advance, but somehow I just knew.
Interesting.
Well, if Christina's a woman, then maybe Christina is also going to turn out to be William. And it's just, it was just weird that happened to be the case. But I didn't, I other than reading one draft of the pilot script, I didn't see anything before they started releasing the previews.
Interesting.
Okay. I did get a look at the screening of the first 5 episodes that they sent out to all the reviewers, but at the same time the reviewers did. And then the rest of the season I saw the same time everyone else did. So yeah, it was a really interesting experience, especially as things diverged more towards the end.
Yeah.
And the real turning point was the episode 6.
Is that the Korea one?
The Korea one, which is the only one that has no parallel in the novel.
Right.
But what was funny about that was that I had always thought if I was going to do more with this, at some point I would want to go back and tell the story of Atticus in Korea. And
very cool.
My take would have been the idea I had was more of a Predator type thing of, this adventure that Atticus and a bunch of his fellow soldiers were sent on, where they were sent, behind enemy lines and got caught in a kind of a Predator situation having to do with war crimes, but still covering in some ways similar to what they were going into in that episode. And so that was sort of weird to see, well, now that they've done that, I probably can't go back and do that, but that's okay. I really loved that episode. And I loved the fact that one of the things the show was never afraid to do was sort of throw something at you. Like, you don't see any of the characters you've already met in that episode until like 20 minutes into the episode. You're like, what is this? And I'm just laughing, saying, this is great. This is going to piss some people off, but I think this is wonderful.
Yeah, right.
In general, the casting was superb, but I've got a funny story for you there. So my wife, who in a general sense doesn't really indulge much of the horror stuff, but I had just read the book. We had just had you on the show. I was able to coerce her. I was like, let's just check this out. And because I'd read the book, I had a general knowledge of what we'd see. Well, then you get to the Korea episode, which is not only not at all in the book, but also features a sex demon monster thing that is pretty graphic in the episode. And I remember sitting there being like, ooh, this is new material. I'm sorry.
Hang on, honey. I don't know what's coming.
I didn't know that was about to happen.
I have to say, I would probably not have gone there myself. It probably wouldn't have been received the same way coming from me anyhow. But
sure. Well, in the spirit of some of the changes, I am curious, and I want you to say, generally speaking, whatever else you want to about your experience of this moment. But, for those who read the book and then watched the series, there are, as you highlighted, some clear deviations. What would you say? We'll start with the quote unquote negative. Were there any that you're like, I really like the way I did it? Were there ones that you would have said that left kind of a sour taste in my mouth for the change?
No, I think the attitude I went into it was that Misha's going to have her own interpretation of this. So I very much felt like, it was weird. I didn't feel like, at this point, it's not my story. It's Misha telling a version of the story I told. So it's like we're almost working off similar source material. So at no point, there are decisions I wouldn't have made. The story as I would have told it is the one I actually told. So there's a sense in which everything that was done differently in the series is stuff that either didn't occur to me, or if it had, it would have been, that's not my version of this.
Sure.
Right.
But that's different from saying it's wrong. And I think that's one of the things I'm really happy about the way I know Misha has talked about it, is that there really isn't a sense of, like, some reviewers, it's different. Reviewers do tend to take sides and say, well, I like this better, or I like this version better. But my sense is like, part of what I liked is that it's a conceit and a concept that can be done in multiple different ways. And it's not exhausted even now. You could have a third party come in and tell their version of this and have it, make different choices and have them work too. So I was really mostly trying to judge it on its own terms for the most part. And I think it generally worked on its own terms. There were a few points where I felt the pacing was so fast, it was easy to miss things. But nothing where I felt like, what I really appreciate about your response, Matt, is that you didn't just come out and say, Nathan, that's a really grossly reductive way to ask that question. So I appreciate that. But no,
I'm kidding, because I'm going to pivot into really good too. So I'll speak for myself as being a reader and then a watcher of, pivoting into, are there any changes that you were that kind of put wind in your sails of what they did? Because one, I found it one of my more enjoyable moments in the book is the Horace chapter. The D analog of that was fantastic on screen with the dancing girls. Do you remember this?
Oh yeah.
I mean, that was a really strong interpretation.
I'm blanking on their names. I think it's Flopsy and Topsy or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
Uncle Tom's Cabin. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that was definitely it was nice. It was nice. It was like same basic idea, but just creepy in a different way.
Yes.
And I think the thing that got me the most was probably just watching the pilot. And that is a perfect example of, and there was the thing that like, I was not a part of the production, and, Misha was very open to, feel free to, give me any thoughts you have and stuff like that. But it was just like, there was a point early on where I recognized that I don't really have the vocabulary. I have no experience working in a visual medium. And so I'm going to, she doesn't need me leaning over her shoulder, giving her ideas. I'll give her my notes on what I was thinking and, remain on call if she wants to bounce anything off me. And definitely watching the pilot and just seeing how I got envious at certain points at the ability with a single image to convey what would take paragraphs of exposition. So
right.
Like in the novel, he drives home alone in a car. In the series, she puts him on a bus. And of course, the reason she does that, one, is then he has people to talk to.
Yeah.
So you can do what I can do with just internal monologue. And again, they just, that one tracking shot at the beginning where they're coming down the bus and you see the back of the bus reserved for members of the colored race. It just tells you right away where you are, and it conveys in a very visual way very quickly what you need to know without, you know, having to resort to forced voiceover. And I thought that was like, wow, this was great, and this is something I wouldn't have known how to do. So it was just neat to see things like that. And then where a lot of the best bits are there, but they're either moved around or they happen, you know, or they happen in a slightly different way. And so I thought that was really effective as well. So it's the pilot in particular just like really blew me away.
Well, and I think one thing that probably happened to a lot of viewers is that, like, I know this happened to me. So obviously we read your book and had the conversation about it on the show. Then after seeing the series, there were a couple that I wanted to go back and reread those stories. It was this kind of dialogue of the medium having the story. The stories were propelling imaginative interplay with each other, and I really enjoyed that. I just love the way that you've expressed your experience of going through it. This is going to seem like a random non sequitur, but my son has been reading a lot of Calvin and Hobbes recently. He discovered it almost on his own. But I remember something Bill Watterson always used to say about Hobbes when they said, like, well, is it that he's a character a la Toy Story who, you know, sort of falls apart whenever adults are in the room, or is he, you know, like, is he pretending, or what's really going on with Hobbes? And Watterson was always like, well, Calvin sees him one way and the rest of the world sees him another way. And so in thinking about this idea of like, this is Misha's vision of these same kind of stories, and this is, you know, your vision of these same kind of stories. And I love the way that in many ways they can kind of complement each other rather than compete with one another in how they sit within our own imaginations exploring the same ideas. I think that's really, it's like the work stacks upon itself in very, propulsive ways. I like that.
And I mean, that was, you know, the only times I would ever get frustrated really there were reviewers or people reacting to the show who just couldn't seem to get that and always felt like it had to be, you know, there's one way that's better to do this, or I didn't like this in the series, you know, it really should have been done the way it was in the book. And it was like,
right.
Like I say, you know, there were times watching the show where they did stuff that was different enough that I had to watch it once just to see what happened and then go back, and then I could engage on my own terms, get past the part like, really, you made that decision there? It's like,
right.
And not in a way like, oh, that's terrible, but it's just like, wow, it would not have occurred to me to do that. And but then let me rewatch this the way you want me to see it, and I get it. And
yeah, that's great.
What a wild sort of sensation that must be to be the architect and author of the version and then absorb the other version and kind of.
But part of what I love about this too is that they sort of actually, and I don't know if, you know, how much this was a reaction to the way I was reacting to Misha's initial ideas, but they did sort of build in this idea of, it's a parallel universes where there's a point where Atticus goes through time and comes back with a version of what sounds very much like my version of the story, even though it's not written by Matt Ruff, it's written by Atticus's unborn child. So, but even so, is this sort of like a nod to saying, there's other ways to tell the story too, and we recognize
it's very Dark Tower.
So I love that, and you know, I'm still very much thinking about writing additional novels about this. So it's kind of nice that they've sort of set the stage for that. Where if I do, we've already got this built-in idea that it's okay. I'm going to go into very different places than where it looks like the series is going.
And
I still have a lot of stuff I want to say about, you know, characters who are no longer living in the Misha's version of Lovecraft Country universe.
Right.
So in a way, it's kind of cool. But she killed off a couple of the people who I really wanted to do a lot more with. So that completely eliminates the issue of, you know, any sort of rights issue of like, oh, Matt's taking ideas that were work product of HBO. It's like, nope, I've got ideas that clearly will not be, because those guys aren't even going to be in your future version. So it's kind of a nice,
What's funny about that, this is completely random, but I can remember, and the sequencing of this is not terribly important, but I can remember I read, so the very first time I saw Jurassic Park, the film, that was my first experience of that story. But then I went back and read Michael Crichton's novel. And this is not a major spoiler, but different people, to your point, Matt, different people die in his novel than die in the film. Most specifically, Ian Malcolm dies in the novel, or at least while it's not explicitly stated that Ian Malcolm is dead, towards the end of it, the characters are talking about like which of us made it or whatever. And Ian Malcolm, they shake their head like, no, Ian Malcolm didn't make it.
I thought it was pretty explicit that he died, but then Crichton retroned that later.
Right. Then it's like,
I
was
no
like,
question that he was dead, but then I was like, oh, he shows up again? Wait, what?
right. And then like the Lost World, his follow-up novel, it like almost is all centered around him. So I'm like,
That's
wait a minute, what did you just do here?
I mean, when you've got Goldblum,
Well, and that was my point, is like, maybe, hey, who knows? I mean, people live, they die, and it's an imaginative fantasy world. Bring them back if you want. Like in the series, they can, they can basically find some machination that will, introduce them back in. Who knows? And that's the beauty of the fantasy world that you've kind of created, is this ability that really the rules are kind of what we make them to be and what we establish them to be in universe. So yeah, that's kind of cool.
Well, before we deviate too far from that, Matt, you referenced other friend of the Fog, Blake Collier. Speak a little bit. What do you have going on right now? If someone didn't listen to our conversation with you back in the day, what's something they can pick up right now that you would encourage us to look at?
So my most recent novel, which is, of course, it's reversed, but yeah, it's 88 Names, which is a more science fictional. It's set about 20 years in the future, and the protagonist, John Chu, is what is known as a Sherpa, which is basically a paid guide to online role-playing games. So you want to play World of Warcraft, but the futuristic version of that, but you don't want to spend hundreds of hours learning how to play and building up a character. You can just pay him, and he will provide you with a ready-made character and a team of skilled players to basically cater a night's adventure for you in virtual reality. And he gets a new client who calls himself Mr. Jones and claims to be a wealthy, famous individual with powerful enemies. And he's offering basically $100,000 a week for a comprehensive tour of the world of VR gaming. And so it's one of those deals that sounds too good to be true, but the money's real. So he takes the gig, but he begins to suspect that Mr. Jones is actually Kim Jong-un, the North Korean dictator, who's like exploring VR for reasons that have nothing to do with entertainment, that have more to do with power. So, and one of the conceits of the novel is that the first 2/3 of the story are set entirely online in virtual reality. So everybody has total control over how they look and sound. It's a point where machine translation is good enough that you can fake fluency in a language you've never studied. So basically, all the cues you would normally use to figure out what to think about somebody are skewed. They're going through this computer mediation. And so the question is, how well can you know people if you can't trust what you see and hear? And John Chu, because he's a businessman, is actually quite good at, he needs to know what people are thinking. And so he's actually very good at profiling people. At least he fancies himself a good profiler. So it is this interesting cat and mouse game. And it's an adventure in a world where everybody is a shapeshifter and everybody is playing a masquerade game. And and it's also, because he's got an angry ex-girlfriend sort of somewhere in the background, it's also the closest thing I've ever come to writing a romantic comedy. My wife has been telling me for years I should write a romantic comedy, and this is definitely not what she had in mind, but I would argue that it also qualifies. So it's lighter than Lovecraft Country for sure, but it's still got some interesting things to say about identity and the way the mischief people get up to when they think their actions can never be, assigned to their identity.
Sure.
And so Blake and I, have been doing, we did a podcast that where we talked to various people in the VR world about everything from, the morality and ethics of VR to the technology and other things like that. And we revived it for the paperback just came out. So we did a small revival of the podcast. And that's what I've been up to lately.
That's awesome. No, that's
still not doing numbers like Lovecraft Country, but
one step at a time, Matt. Come on.
Yeah. We'll get there.
If you give a Ruff a cookie, come on.
So yeah. Without further ado, would like to get into like one of the things that I was really excited about myself, and I know Nathan was as well. Obviously, we love and love having you on. To talk about your own work, do that ad infinitum. But what was really cool was sort of pitching like, hey, we're in this series, what scares us? And sort of, propping up, this is what the concept behind that is. And you had thrown out, as the listeners will see on the episode title, the film by Brad Anderson, Session 9, which is a film that I had seen prior to this. I think this was Nathan's first time seeing it. Nathan, you can, in a second, you can chime in. But I'm curious, just sort of as a launch pad into this. Obviously, this is a series about kind of what gets under our skin, some things that kind of unsettle us a little bit. But I'm curious why, when we were kind of conversing by email about like, hey, what would you be interested in covering? What about Session 9 stood out to you? I'd like to know a bit of your history of the film and kind of what prompted you to say, hey, let's talk about this on the show.
So the film came out in 2001, which was, at that time, I was finishing up a book called Set This House in Order, which is basically a story about two people with multiple personality disorder who develop a relationship with each other. One of them is a self-aware multiple who's built an imaginary house in his head where his different people can all see and talk to one another. And it's actually a system that apparently some real world multiples have used to sort of stabilize themselves and basically bring stability and are able to get along in the world. And he meets a woman named, my protagonist, Andy Gage, meets a woman named Penny Driver, who is also multiple, but hasn't quite figured it out yet. And then one of her more self-aware alters gets after him to try and help her build a house of her own. And that ends up destabilizing him and leads to further plot complications. But anyway, I just finished that up and the first draft of that, but I was still sort of interested in other takes on MPD. And there is a subplot involving multiple personality disorder within Session 9, which I think is probably what initially drew me to it. Plus, it's just got a really creepy poster.
It really does.
And then, but what ultimately got me about it, like, well, first of all, it's total Matt bait, because it's about this asbestos abatement crew who are hired to go into Danvers State Mental Institution, which was a real building. It's actually a whole complex that was built in the 1870s, I think, and was it's been abandoned. It was abandoned in the 1980s, and then by the time these guys arrived, it water damaged. The place was falling down, and the filming was perilous. They had to restrict themselves to a very small portion of the building. But anyway, it's just this amazing setting, and you've got these working class guys working a very dangerous and high stress job in an isolated, creepy location, and it's very, very strong characters, and so it's about their being threatened from without and within, and very much a film more about, and Brad Anderson talks about this on the director's commentary, very more about dread than shock. There are very few real jump scares. It's all about, we're in this creepy, oppressive place, and bad things are going to happen here. And I do want to give out a quick spoiler warning. If anyone has not seen this, I think it's a really good movie, and I think it's really worth seeing. So if you haven't and you have any intention of seeing it, at this point, I would step away from the podcast and come back later, because ultimately the thing the movie is really about, as we find out, Gordon, who is the guy who runs the asbestos abatement business, he, in a fit of rage, murders his wife and infant daughter, and then in horror at what he has done, represses that and replaces it with a different memory that, no, I didn't kill my wife, and I certainly would never raise a hand to my child. I hit my wife, which is still really bad. Shouldn't have done it, but but she's okay, and the kid's okay, and but she's mad at me, and I can't go home until she forgives me. And if I drive past my house and I notice that the shades are all down and the lights are all out and it looks like there's nobody alive in there, well, that's just my wife letting me know that she's still mad and I still can't come home, and I mustn't go in the house until she says it's okay. And gosh, I hope that's soon. And of course, and he's dealing with this throughout the whole film, and like having basically protected himself temporarily from the knowledge of what he's done, he then goes to work in total denial, but it's eating away at him. And it's sort of that plus this setting slowly builds up and tips him further and further into paranoia and madness, and leads ultimately to this massacre in the final act of the movie. And this just, to me, touches on a personal horror that I have because I, like a lot of artists, I am a somewhat obsessive personality, and it's very useful when you're writing, and it allows you to keep very detail oriented and keep a lot of stuff in perspective, but it can turn around and really bite you if, where you can get obsessed over complete trivia. And this is something else on the DVD commentary, where Brad Anderson is talking about, there's a couple of points where he talks about little things that weren't perfect, like scenes where, the shot wasn't what we hoped, or, the continuity is a little off here. And it's like, I totally know what he's feeling when he's doing that. It's like, it's 95%. It's not perfect.
Right.
And
right.
to anybody who wasn't involved in the making of the film, anyone who's not you, it's like, if the film's working for you, you don't care. It's like, it's not perfect, but nothing is.
Right.
But for him, it's just like, I can't, that thing's 2 centimeters off. And if you feel that way about, stuff that really doesn't matter, then there's this terror of what your brain would do if it had something serious to worry about, like some horrible thing that you had done. And one of the scariest stories I ever heard, I was in college. One of my professors, Bob Farrell, told the story about he'd been stranded overnight, either in a bus station or an airport. Weather socked them in, and he struck up a conversation with another stranded traveler. And this guy told Bob, basically, in the course of the conversation, that he and his wife had an infant child. I don't remember if it was a son or a daughter, but one night the kid spikes a fever, and his wife really wanted to take the kid to the emergency room, and he was like, no, it's just a high, the kid's just got a temperature, let him sleep it off. And
oh, wow.
And the kid died, basically, in the night.
Lord have mercy.
And the kicker was, this was not something that had just happened. This was an older man, and he was referring to an incident that had occurred decades previously. And yet, it could have been 30 years before this, but it was still so present in his mind, this one mistake he had made as a father, this one failure, that in a conversation with a total stranger, he found a way to bring it up, to confess it.
Jeez.
And that to me is just, and then you take that and you imagine, what if it's not a sin of omission? What if it's like, no, I just got mad one night and took it out. Yeah.
Right.
That to me is just the definition of what hell would be like. And just one more thing about this, just because it really does fit into why this made such a big impression on me. There's a journalist I follow on Twitter named Elizabeth Brunig. She writes for the Washington Post, I think also for the New York Times. She's Catholic, pro-life, but consistently so. So she thinks abortion is wrong, but she's also opposed to capital punishment, and she believes in a very strong social welfare state. So it's like, I'm my brother's keeper after he's born, not just before. And,
right.
And she's written recently about, she attended an execution and how she felt about that. And you can sort of guess what some of the reaction to that was. And one of the things she mentioned was just that one of the problems we have in society right now is that there really is no model for forgiveness and absolution and what that should look like. And part of the problem, and this is the thing that really stuck with me, is that, she says is that when most people talk about forgiveness, what they're actually referring to is exoneration. That the way you deal with someone's sin is by deciding it wasn't that bad, or if it was that bad, if you can't deny it, then there's some extenuating circumstance where it was bad, but they had a reason. And the problem is that you can't exonerate everybody, and you shouldn't try, but even if you do, you're still going to be left with human beings who do genuinely, undeniably awful things, and they need to be held to account. But having been held to account, then what? And if you don't have an answer to that question, and a lot of people don't, then you have a problem. And what Session 9 does for me, it's like it's a really good demonstration of how sin without the possibility of forgiveness leads to madness. There's this thing I've done and I cannot live with the knowledge of it. So my two options are: one, stop living, kill myself, or two, deny reality and commit whatever additional sins are necessary to maintain that state of ignorance. And which is what happens with Gordon in the movie. And I find it incredibly moving and powerful in that way. It's not a happy story at all. It's like, this is the worst case scenario, but it just really got to me. And a lot of Hollywood movies have a hard, they just don't handle moral questions like this very well. They go for facile, easy answers. And I would contrast it with like a movie I did like in a lot of ways, the original version of Flatliners, which is about medical students who want to find out what life after death is like. So they kill themselves briefly and then resuscitate themselves. And what happens in the movie is if you die, you bring your sins back with you. But the resolution there is very much the exoneration model. It felt to me watching it, even the one guy who had actually killed somebody, it was like, well, yeah, you killed somebody, but you just feel bad about it long enough, and then it gets better. It's okay. And you're somehow, and I don't know, it just, this felt much more realistic about what damage you can do to yourself if you are forced to live with an evil act and there's just no way out. That there's no absolution, there's no room,
Well, and in a lot of ways, sorry, Nathan. No, in a lot of ways, I mean, so much of what you said is very profound and thought provoking. One of the things on this exoneration piece, because I think a lot of times I'm also thinking in my mind about, well, what does it kind of require when we hold people to account? And a lot of times what we ask of them is some sense of ownership. Like you reference flatliners, and we're not having a conversation about flatliners, but like really what largely sort of pays it out right there is who's willing to own their sin and who's still in perpetual denial of it. And in many ways, sort of today, it feels like, and this is what I'm scratching at in my mind, it feels like kind of what people are pursuing in terms of accountability is ownership, is just the admission of just own what you did. Just like admit or at the very least, speak that this is what had happened, that this is what was done. And I feel like even if that was, obviously in session 9, Gordon can't even verbalize it, to your point. He can't even verbalize it to himself. He verbalizes it as a much milder, if what happened was a 10, I'm going to verbalize the 5. And I'm going to verbalize that this is kind of what I did. And that can kind of scratch at the door of ownership, or it might be an illusion of ownership, that I've confessed some, much watered down, diluted version of what it really was. And what's interesting to me about that is in this conversation of forgiveness, and it's something obviously, I think in many ways it would be easy to say that largely forgiveness, I'm going to make a rather bold statement, and I don't even know that I fully agree with it. I'm just going to throw it out there for exploration for us.
Welcome to the show, Matt.
Welcome to the show. This is what we do.
I've been listening to your back catalog, so I know that you go this way very often.
It's true. So one of the things
Reed declares he's going to make a bold statement, distance himself from it, then make the bold statement, then decide to buy in on it.
So like what I'm wrestling with is like, who determines criteria for forgiveness is the question that I'm wrestling with. Who determines the criteria? Is the criteria defined objectively by a court of peers, maybe, or a jury of peers? Is the criteria defined by the victim, by the wounded? Which in that case, how is that defined when the wounded, as in the case of session 9, have been annihilated from the world? So they're not even invited to the conversation because their victimization was ultimate in that sense. And so that's really the wrestling is what defines the criteria for forgiveness. Obviously, people of faith might speculate that, well, the criteria is defined objectively and defined therefore by God, or the moral standard holder, the moral compass bearer. But I think it's worth wrestling for ourselves, even if we don't do that much of it in this conversation of really in this conversation about accountability, is, well, what is really the criteria for forgiveness? And is the aim, forgiveness, or is it vengeance, or whatever? Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Well, no, and I mean, I think obviously I think when Liz was talking, obviously her answer to that would be society has to collectively come up with an answer because we obviously want to hold people accountable, but I think part of this is a phenomenon that happens a lot on Twitter, and again, it's one of the reasons I probably should stop going on Twitter, but what people in general should stop, where people get called out for bad behavior, and often it's something horrible that they've done. Sometimes it may be some racist statement they've made, some racist thing they've done, or some other sometimes it's a more significant crime that they've been caught up in. And yes, people call them out and you're supposed to apologize, but then this thing happens is where if the person actually tries to apologize, then the Twitter hive mind comes in and collectively judges, criticizes, well, is this to sound like a real apology? Is it good enough? And it becomes this, it's not about genuine remorse. It's about, can you perform your act of contrition convincingly enough that people will let you, that the hive mind will say, okay, well, apparently you really are sorry. And but I feel like it has nothing to do with, it has nothing to do with an actual, like the motivations have nothing really to do with finding justice there. It's more about just the joy of judging people who've been caught doing something bad. And that's a different, whereas what you really need, it's like, it's more for what you need is a more objective rule that we've decided on in advance without knowing who we're going to be judging or what we're going to be judging them for. And rather than something that comes together on the fly and impromptu. That's the thing, is like, this is off the cuff judgment that is not really, that at least some of the people participating in the conversation have no interest in genuine absolution. They're just enjoying kicking someone when they're down and saying, nope, you're not sorry enough, keep going.
And feeling a bit superior. Well, absolutely.
It's interesting. I feel like it is not my interest to make all of this conversation about of a political nature, but it feels like we're close to it, so I'll at least touch the rail. I appreciate your invitation. I'm just not sure all our listeners will, but there is a thing that really grieved me about, our listeners will not be surprised at this particular take, but our most recent president, and fear of a name begets fear of a thing itself. Thank you, J.K. Rowling. Trump. The nature of the person is what kind of broke my heart, because what you're identifying, what it feels to me, what I hear you identify, is it's so hard to find a model of not even just contrition, just it feels like we are morally adrift. And I actually don't mean that in this nihilistic, cynical type of way. I mean it in a, holy cow, there aren't models we can point to, because whether it's actual people occupying offices, whether it's disinformation that creates vacuums around people who might not be that bad but now occupy office, whether it's formerly what we would have thought of as moral leadership in churches and civic institutions that get found out for heinous wrongdoing, that all I'm trying to articulate is this very real problem, whether it's on Twitter or whether it's local, that is a scary problem, which is the relativity of moral model, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
No, I mean, I think it's one of the inherent traps in a pluralistic society. If there is no absolute agreed upon moral center, and there can't be in a society like America, then you always will run the risk of, which system of justice do I appeal to with the thing? Like, again, if the thing you've done is not literally a crime in particular, then you run into this, like, you can just sort of shop. Where do I go to get somebody to pat me on the head and say, okay, you're forgiven. No, don't worry about it. And, and that is why, yes, that there's no absolution, but there's plenty of condemnation, because everybody can find something to be angry at, and it's easy to whip up a mob. It's much harder, though, to sort of agree, particularly on a society-wide level, that, okay, this is how we're going to, rehabilitate these people. This is like, we will hold them to account, but then this is the route we're going to offer them back into society, having first registered the gravity of what they have actually done. And
well, and you make
all we can do is point a finger at this point. That's the problem. Is there's no court you can go to for social, except the court of public opinion, which is malleable and manipulable and fickle.
And sometimes grossly incorrect. But you make a good point, tethering back to the film a bit here, Matt, of Gordon specifically, which is an analog, an echo of our own reality, which is when we can't when we can't internalize the means of our own moral accountability, we warp the reality around us to accommodate our
right.
transgression.
Yeah.
And you're, again, tiptoeing onto the political, you're seeing that in a very real way right now with actual legislation that is being proposed and pushed and passed to accommodate a false reality. And that is an insane thing, because if you spin that out, because those, legislation is a traditional form of action and an avenue of quote unquote change. But when those start pinballing into non-traditional forms of change, you see things like January 6th, which is okay, well, now action is happening to accommodate a reality that really is false.
And so, not to piggyback too much, but just the more we get into this conversation, the more I'm so pleased to have been able to revisit this film, because that's this sort of spiral that Gordon is on. Is now he's actually like a rampant serial killer, not in the sense where he like hunts them down, but kills everybody involved in this, to the point that when McManus finally shows up, and all McManus is doing is like, what's going on?
My man's just a day laborer. He's like,
he's
I'm
just
here.
Like,
Where do I punch in at?
Oh. Right. This is your bonus. I got your ice pick right here. Like
Well, no, that was like, David Caruso sums it up personally. David Caruso's ghost, actually, at that point, where he's like, well, Gordon, I'd be careful if they find out about this one, they're going to find out about all the other ones, and
all the other ones,
and that's the problem, is that he's just basically, the only way to protect himself from, he's got to kill anyone who not might rat him out to other people, but anyone who might force him to acknowledge what he has done.
Right, because the tricky thing. And I'm going to express a bit of my sort of theological framework here for a minute, is one of the ways that I have always interpreted the presence of God from what I read in the scriptures and what I've experienced in my own life and in the way that my faith has played out is this notion of, I am not afraid in my theological framework and in my prayers to be transparent with God. For those who believe in him, like if I'm conversing with a deity, I'm transparent about what I've done, because he presumably knows it all. So why would I try to hide any of that? And believe in my theological framework that I will find in him a righteous judge, in the sense of someone who knows all things and will lead me on a path to forgiveness. One of the things pivoting out of my theological framework to the sort of what we're scratching at, both in the context of what you just said about the David Caruso's ghost in session 9, like if you tell about this, you got to tell about everything else. And one of the things in the hive mind of the court of public opinion, and in many ways just society at large, is I think in many ways we perhaps knowingly, perhaps unknowingly, inhibit accountability by people not wanting to open Pandora's box. If I come forward and say that, look at what happened not that long ago with, I don't even remember the full context of the conversation, but look at what happened not that long ago with Liam Neeson, who did not experience a pervasive sense of things, but Liam Neeson had verbalized, from what I understood in the conversation, verbalized confessionally some racist tendencies that he had experienced, and verbalizing them as a bad thing to be condemned, and yet was momentarily skewered to the degree that the film that he had out at that point, people were like boycotting and everything like that. And in those ways, it wrangles up the question of like, what do you really want? What is the goal? Do you really want someone to take ownership and learn and grow and move forward into hopefully adopting a new mindset about these things? Or do you want people to have always gotten it right from the beginning and to have never done anything heinous, lest everything become a house of cards and crumble under them? And it's dreadful, the ways in which we are not places where someone can come with. It's hard to talk about minor and major offenses in these schemes because
I know, and that is where the difficulty lies. Obviously, that if you are Black and have been the victim of racist violence, you may not be quite so quick to be forgiving on that score, and that's fine. And I think there's also a cynical take that people have that you're only saying this to get a pass. You're not really, I think this is one of the difficulties, though, is that you've got to be careful about who you confess to.
Yeah.
If you're going to confess your sins, you just need to be aware that not other people are not required to. They're not all priests who are required to respect the sanctity of the confessional or to give you the absolution you're seeking for. Some people are just going to say, you are the avatar of things I've been dealing with my whole life, and I do not have any sympathy for you. And that may not be a Christian response, but it is a human response. And
yes,
you're a fool if you don't think of that. And there are of course cases of people who have this mistaken idea that yes, all I have to do is confess and it's over. And it's like, no, particularly if the thing you've done is bad enough, you may have people who are going to say, well, thank you for confessing to that. Now you're going to be sorry. And
that's it. Right.
You know, what's so funny is I thought about that today. I actually, sort of liked the guy at least 15, 20 years ago when I saw his first film, but do y'all remember about 2 years ago in the height of Me Too, when Morgan Spurlock of Super Size Me made some very confessional public statements that were like, why did you do that? Like, not as in we shouldn't be contrite. It's exactly your point, Matt. It was like, because what happened is his desire and intention for, absolution was met with the meat grinder, no Super Size Me pun intended, of just like, whoa, that you what you meant for a positive was placed in the wrong place. And that's stumbling into some profundity of where you place those confessions, and those where is safe and right and comfortable. But what's scary is the world we've created right now, which is, we've referenced Twitter, these big tech companies, that don't care about your privacy, Matt Ruff, don't care about your inner life, Reed Lackey. They use these thoughts against you for the algorithm, which, as we've talked about from Dr. Sleep, man takes a drink takes a man. So to the algorithm, and on we go. And we're left as less than human, which is startling and troubling.
Yeah. And that is, and it that's the other thing, though, is when you confess, part of confession, you are placing a burden on the people you're talking to. And they may not be interested in that. They may be mad. Yeah. So it certainly there is you need to be smart about when to open up and reveal yourself, but it's just there is a human need to be able to deal with past sins in some way. And I think it's weird to talk about it this way. I think one of the few advantages that Gordon has is that he doesn't have to worry about the court of public opinion. Gordon's problem is just living with himself.
Right.
How do I just admit to myself what I've done? It's like, it's understandable if he stands up and admits what he's done, he's going to go to jail for the rest of his life. And but even that, it's more a question of, but you still will be alive. How do you live with that knowledge? And that is really more of a personal route to forgiveness or some sort of salvation that he's got to find, regardless of whether, it's less about negotiating with what society is going to think with you, and it's just how do you find a way to live in the knowledge of what you've done. And I think just be in a way, because it's so obvious how other people are going to see him. His only real negotiable problem is, how is he going to live with himself, and how is he going to
And he can't cope at that point. We're talking about, like, who do you confess to? And I kept thinking back to the moment in the film, like, it's hard to fully grasp. I think the film's probably clearer than I'm making it about when he kills all these people. But at some point in the film, he confesses to David Caruso and even says, like, you can't tell the guys about this. And David Caruso is immediately very like, come on, man. Like, of course, like, you're safe with me. And then he goes and tells the guys, like, look, we got to get Gordon off the.
That was a hard pivot there for old.
Actually, it's funny. That was the thing about that, is like, I watched that scene a couple of times because it's true. And part of what I think he was doing there is, like, he was just desperately trying to float this version of the story to see how
what people would
other people would respond. And I actually, looking at it more carefully, I felt like, particularly when he asked David Caruso not to tell anybody, I thought the response was a bit more ambiguous. Like, you really think you can hide this, that you hit your wife?
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
And,
Yeah. Okay.
and,
Yeah.
and there was a part of me that wondered if Gordon picked up on that too. And that fed further his paranoia, because of course he ends up focusing the subject. Well, maybe, you know, there's people dead around here, but maybe it's you, David Crusoe. You did this because I tried to confess to you. I gave you this sort of half true version of what happened, and you were repulsed on some level by what I had done. You didn't encourage me to say, you know, we can work through this. You were more like, huh. And I think he would have been very sensitive at that point to what other people are going to think of him when they find out. And that is not the response. I know if I had been in that situation, the way David Crusoe was reacting is not what I would have been looking for. I don't know.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Well, I'll say, I mean, the movie tricked me because this is the first time I'd seen it, and you know, Reed, this is your second, Matt. I don't know how many times it is for you, but the movie does a decent job of at least fainting towards all of them being possible suspects at a certain point, you know, of what's transpiring, or of one of them, you know, kind of shaking loose from reality. But I mean, I even wrote down, I'll own it. Maybe I deleted it because I realized the idiocy of my ways. I mean, I was like, it's Caruso. By the end of it, I was like, oh, okay, it's not. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
That's dark. So I want to ask you guys a question. This is coming back up to the shallows a little bit for a little lightness. Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
And then we can, if we want to, after this little story time, we can dive back into the depths. And this is a question straight out of the film. So I'm going to ask it and I'm going to answer it while y'all think about what your answer will be. And as Gordon asks Phil, so too do I ask Reed and Matt. Guys, what is the stupidest thing you've ever done?
Oh my God.
So again, I'm actually decoupling this a bit from a moralistic response, but I had pondered that because when he asked that question, listeners may not have discerned these last months, Reed and I are very intentional about trying to be inquisitive towards each other about the material we're covering. When Gordon asked that question, I was like, there it is. There's a question. Write
that down.
So I pondered this today. So while y'all are thinking about what's the stupidest thing you've ever done, I'm emphasizing the stupid part for me. And so I'll let the listeners enjoy these tales. And if your brain allows you to pay attention to them while you think of your own thing, more power to you. So I was processing, I was like, what is the dumbest thing? And specifically, I wanted to think of like as an adult, you know, because clearly in the context of the movie, heavy morality aside, it's an adult stupid choice, not so much our idiocies as a kid. And I'm gonna tell a funny story that's really going to illustrate how single-minded and stupid I can be if I work at it. So we've got 3 kids. The third one is omitted from this because I learned my lesson after 2 errors. So crib building, really strange digression here, but crib building is the topic of my stupidest thing I've ever done. So when our first child was, you know, either imminent or surely she was not quite born yet, daddy wanted to prove his sort of spousal ingenuity and put the crib together. So I'm working tediously on this stupid crib in what would be the baby's room, and I put it together and I'm all proud of myself, and then I realized I put it together wrong, which, if you know anything about how cribs are assembled, is a real pain in the ass. And so I have to dismantle this crib. So then I put it back together, and no, it's quite true. I put it together wrong again. I really have a problem with instructions. So that's kid 1, is putting a crib together incorrectly twice in the span of, I don't know, 24 hours. So kid number 2 rolls along, and I've learned my lesson. You know, I'm going to get this right. I'm not going to fail. My wife was working one day, the crib showed up. We had a ranch home, you know, it's a single-story ranch home, living room area. Down the hallway was kid number 2's room. And I turned on some tunes. I knew I had kid number 1's errors in my head cribs errors in my head. I'm like, I'm not going to do that again. So I've got this spacious room. I lay out all the stuff. I've got some tunes on. My wife's working. I'm going to surprise her by putting this crib together while she's gone. And I succeed. I succeed in putting together kid number 2's crib.
Oh my gosh.
The problem then revealed itself when you really can't take a crib you assembled in one big room, squeeze it through a small hallway to a bedroom down the hall.
Oh, no.
Then, yes, gentlemen, adult friends, it got stuck in the hallway because I was so mad trying to get this stupid crib. And I left it suspended between the walls of the hallway in the air. I was like, I'm so mad and so disheartened.
Wow.
It feels so stupid. So at least the way Gordon phrases, what is the stupidest thing you've ever done? Incorrectly reading friggin' instructions. Because sure enough, friends, the instructions, while yes, teaching you how to assemble it, yes, also tell you where to assemble it. And it's in the destination room, not
Of course.
the room. But of course I failed that part. So yeah, that was what I thought about for what is the stupidest thing, without getting hyper confessional here on the show, that I have ever done. So who would like to go next for the stupidest thing they've ever done?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's hard to. I'll jump on the sword.
So hard to choose. Yeah.
I know. That's like. I'm like.
That's why
I'm
I
like-
want to go first. Get my stupidity out of the way so you can feel the freedom.
Well, you've also, you also had the luxury of like thinking about this for a couple
You know
of days.
what's funny about you saying
know?
that? No, that was just today. What's funny about that is I thought about emailing both of you, like, "Hey, be prepared to answer the," and then I was just like, "Nah, I'll just have them
More
freestyle."
fun off the cuff anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, put it on the fly.
Yeah.
Gosh, it is really, really hard. To quote Ash, I'm going to do a lot of stupid things, and I've done a lot of stupid things. So it's funny because like, so the way that you can get like super like existential about things, I'm gonna keep it to the shallows for something like really dumb. That I've done, because like, yeah, you certainly like you've done a lot of stupid things in your life.
Are you speaking to yourself or to me? Because
no,
can't tell whether
to the air,
Yes,
to the
yes.
environment. But I mean, it's like on one hand, there's all the multitude of times that my wife asks me to go look for something. I go look for it. I do not find it.
Oh,
She
man.
goes, and
I
in
feel
2
you, brother.
seconds, she has pulled it forth and she has conjured it. Accio, whatever I was looking.
I just
for.
assume that is a character defect in me at this point. Like that's
Yeah,
that's
it
not
has to
even-
be on. Yeah, it has to be on my end as well. But gosh, I'm gonna need Matt. Do you have something? Because I'm gonna need to actually like define something. Everything coming to
I'm
me now is-
gonna go with another Bob Farrell story. Actually, the same one who told me the story about So another thing Bob would do, he'd have these amazing dinner parties at his house in Ithaca, and I remember one time I was over there, and by the way, the only way I can tell this really stupid story is because it was followed by one of the smarter things I ever did, which is, so we're in his kitchen waiting for these gigantic hamburgers to finish grilling, and I look up on top of Bob's refrigerator and I notice that there's a revolver sitting up there, and my thought process is, no one would leave a loaded revolver lying out on top of a refrigerator at a dinner party when they knew strangers would be wandering the house. So there's no reason to worry that this gun might be loaded. So I pick it up.
Oh no!
And there's this moment where I'm sitting there, geez, what should I do with this toy? Should I point it at my head, or should I just aim out the back of the, like where should I be pointing it when I dry fire this obviously unloaded gun?
Oh my gosh.
And fortunately, I at that point made the smart decision to turn to Bob and say, Bob, this isn't loaded, right?
Oh my God.
And his eyes get very, very big and is like, oh, yeah, I guess it is loaded. And it was in fact a loaded revolver lying out in
plain of everything.
I mean, it was on top of the fridge, so if you were a kid, you wouldn't have been able to reach it. But yeah,
But if you were a house guest, a dinner guest,
What's this?
oh my gosh.
and
Lord.
you know, I mean, so yeah, so he took that, put it in another room.
Yeah, of course.
In the safe.
But you know, it was, and I know for a lot of people, in the circles I hang out these days, this would be seen as a heinous thing, this oversight. How could you possibly do that? But
Sure.
there's this weird divide in America where, you know, there are people who have never been around guns who think of them as the one ring. You know, it's like this malevolent object. Why would you possibly want it? And then there are people who have been around guns, which is like a bandsaw or any other, you know, potentially dangerous tool that you do need to be careful. You can't let your kids play around near it, but accidents happen, oversights happen, and it's just, you know, talk about a lucky moment for Bob. I mean, I'm glad I didn't shoot myself in the head, but I wouldn't have had to live with the mistake. He would have.
Oh my Lord.
Woo!
Yeah, no. Woo!
Yeah.
So yeah, no, yeah, go ahead. Was that okay? So
I can
finally
appreciate that. Yeah, that feels in the spirit. Yeah.
So I finally landed on one that will not, you know, put me or people that I love and am still interacting with at profound risk. Okay, so I was
metaphorically or literally.
right. I was not yet married, and I was not even dating my wife at the time, and I needed a ride to the airport from a girl that I, at the time, was fond of and had kind of tried to make some inclination towards, like, oh, you know, would you like to go out sometime or whatever? And she wasn't really very interested. And I remember she had offered to give me a ride to the airport. And I remember thinking, well, she's going to drop me off at the airport. And typically, with enough time, I like to go if I'm at the airport. I don't really suffer from flight anxiety, but it's nice to have like a glass of wine or something before you go to the airport, right? Well, I was anxious and nervous at the time. I was in my early 20s, and I was anxious and nervous at the time of, like, okay, you know, wanting to be impressive or whatever. So I'm gonna loosen myself up a little bit. You know, I'll have maybe that second glass of wine. You know, and so maybe I'll. That
was your loaded gun right there.
That was my loaded. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, but unfortunately, mine did not end as copacetically as Matt's story ended. So I have the second glass, and we get into the car. And what you realize when you get into someone's car and they're driving is that when the way that they drive in the neighborhood and the way that they drive on the freeway is going to be the same, but freeway is going to be just that much more heightened. And she was spiraling down the highway and just completely weaving in and out of traffic. And I realized about halfway through that I was in a bit of a mayday situation as the passenger in the car of this person that I'm trying to impress. And without getting too gross about the whole thing, the wine was not my friend, and it actually caused me to lose every bit of what I had just consumed right there in the car of the person that I'm trying quite desperately in my life to be impressive towards.
Wow.
So that
Nailed
all happened.
it.
Yeah, that all happened on the freeway. and so then, like, and also, like, there's a deadline to make it to the airport. And so, like, I get to the airport and have to, like, dramatically, like, find a bathroom. I had to, like, change my shirt there, like, and then had to kind of make it through the security gate, had to make it. And of course, like, if you've ever had the experience where you've drunk enough of anything that you would have thrown up, like, it was not, like, also in my head, I'm just like, you know, it's not as if the buzz or whatever just evaporates with all of that. So yeah, that was,
no, it just turns against you.
Yes. Yeah. It was one of the most miserable experiences I've ever had.
I just have this picture of this car just careening into the LAX, departures lane, and you just being booted out of it, and you're dragging yourself through the LAX airport, and like,
it was
security's getting caught. You're barfing on them. That's a wonderful.
Yeah. Needless to say, she never reciprocated.
I'm proud of both of you. Those are good stories. This was fun.
I'm glad it was fun
into the abyss with Gordon.
Oh my God.
Oh.
But no, it's like, but even still, like, and maybe this will be a path sort of out of the shallows back into it. It's like, when you do stuff like that, there's even this sort of like pervasive guilt that haunts you afterwards because of
Sure.
something that you've done that was somewhat impulsive, and you can even like connect the dots on like, well, no, you don't understand, because I was thinking this, and I was thinking it
Right.
would loosen me
Right.
up, and I was thinking it was all going to be fine, and in point of fact, it was not fine, and
It was anything but.
anything but.
Yeah.
But it's like when you get to, because there's also this moment, and I didn't
Clearly things with her worked out.
yeah, no, thank you. But then, like, getting into some depths without being hyper confessional myself either, it's like then we probably all have those things, and maybe pinged when you ask the question, or maybe it's just something that this sort of sits with you, of there are moments that I look back with profound regret,
Sure.
and
Oh,
moments
sure,
that I
yeah.
look back and it's like, God, if I could, like there are the pantheon of people who will say like, no, I live my life with no regrets, and I live my life, just, all those things brought me here. And I'm like, no. I got a list. Like, I've got a list of things that, knowing what I know now, I would love to go back and be like, dude, no, don't do that. Don't say that. Don't interject that moment. Like I remember in high school, and it was because it was in high school, and with profound regret, I remember there was somebody. This is kind of another story of sort of the unrequited affections of the many loves of Reed Lackey or whatever. But there was one moment of which there was a person who at the time, and this was actually an ex-girlfriend, and at the time we were friendly, amicable, as it were, and she had come to me, and it was in high school, and she had come to me, she was in the band, and she had asked me what my opinion was of their performance that they had just done, that they had worked on. Yeah.
That's a
And
landmine.
it was a landmine, and I leapt on it like a gazelle. Like, I completely
Like a gazelle.
Wow.
I completely
You're like 90-pound Captain America jumping on that grenade. You're like, I'll take it. I'll take it.
and I said a very, very hurtful thing about my opinion of their performance, not realizing, and this actually will pivot back into some things possibly with session 9, because then what happened is she told so many of her fellow bandmates, many of whom were my friends, told them what I had said point blank, but what I had said about all of their hard work and what they had done to, it's hard. You put yourself out there and you work really hard in high school band and everything. And I had reductively just sort of taken a cheap shot because of my personal feelings about the thing. And it actually spiraled in many ways to a very, very unpleasant high school year for me, where it was like so many of my friends kind of turned on me, and because I couldn't deny what had been said. I said it, like this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was, I had been a raging jerk and had done so willingly and had no concept of the reciprocal things. And so when we talk about these kind of things and pivoting back into this conversation about like, oh my God, what I wouldn't give to go back and just be a bigger person in that moment, what I wouldn't give to go back and just be, wiser, smarter, more mature, because I would have saved myself a lot of heartache, but also would have spared the hurt that I'm sure other people who in other contexts might have trusted me, liked me, enjoyed my company, but now absolutely and unequivocally didn't, because I was the guy who had said that thing.
Now, Reed, take that scenario, and I'm actually not being jokey here. Take that scenario and imagine it now in a always on, cameras on, social media world. And
I was thinking the same thing.
It amplifies this. I don't know if y'all saw this story from a couple of years ago. I don't actually remember who the personality was, although there's multiple stories about it at this point. But a female, I think it's maybe like a news personality or just entertainment personality, who made some off-color joke on Twitter, the bastion of nuance, and then boarded a flight, like a 10-hour flight.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
This is I'm not going to say her name.
Yeah. I don't even remember.
Thank goodness. Yeah.
But this off-color comment got, between her departure and arrival at her destination X amount of hours later had exploded across the internet. I think Matt lost her job. Like,
yeah, she was flying to South Africa, so it was like a 12-hour flight.
That was it.
So she was out of touch for long enough for the internet to do its thing. And so she was fired from her, she was a communications director, I believe.
Okay.
So it was not unreasonable that with that scandal attached to her name at that point, they just kind of threw their hands. Come on. So no, she had a bad few. I think she's actually working again now. I saw something about her, like she's finally gotten past it, but it's still attached to her name forever on Google. So Now, my wife and I periodically will look at each other and say, "Thank goodness we grew up, prior to this."
Yeah. Which is, it's so hard. Like I just recently, and this is definitely something I can't give too many details about. I'm in my day job, I am a manager and I lead a team of people. And we are going through some transitions in my company, and some of the processes are terribly, terribly frustrating. And, without putting too many things out on a ledge for obvious reasons, one of my employees got so frustrated at a process that they put something in writing. It was not addressed to a person, but they put something in writing that was a very aggressive kind of profane thing. And they had put it in writing with a little bit of impulsiveness, not knowing how visible it was going to be. Turns out it was unfortunately quite visible. And I had the moment where I really had to wrestle with advocating for this person and for what the value that they bring to the team in the face of this one moment of poor decision making. And I got to be, I say get to be, but like I was on the other side of the fence, where here I am standing kind of in an advocacy position and saying, listen, like termination is part of the discussion, and punitive measures are part of the discussion. And I'm in a place to try to be an advocate and to try to say, like, yes, but let's look at the factors. Let's look at everything that's going around. And what we're all talking about is like in that spiral of things, there's none of that going on. There's none of this whole sort of like benefit of the doubt, extenuating circumstances. None of that takes place. It's all dreadfully reactionary. It's all dreadfully swift. And I think getting back to something that we said earlier, that I can't remember exactly what part of the context it came up in, but I'm wrestling even in this conversation with how good it feels to feel superior to people.
Oh yeah.
And how good it feels to be like, that dummy said that, like, I'm glad I didn't say that. And how quickly we can pivot into this seat of profound judgment and sit and be like, well, I'm not that person. And I'm not, obviously, none of us are speaking about letting people off the hook who have committed egregious ongoing criminal activity. It's
but
not
this is always a thing though. And I think it's Matthew's gospel where there's a specific procedure for dealing with somebody. It's like you go talk to them alone about what they did. Right. And then you go with a small group of people, and it's only at that point, after you've done this quiet route, to denounce them in front of the entire congregation. And the reason for that is because even 2,000 years ago, people loved to form a mob and cast stones for just because it felt good. And that's why you've really got to come up with this. And that's the problem, is Twitter has made, Twitter and the internet generally just made it much easier to go to the entire congregation immediately. And if you do that, there will always be somebody who's calling for blood. And so you do need to hold people accountable, but part of that is giving them a way to learn from the mistakes that they make, because we all do. And even if it's something where you've done something that clearly makes you you're no good for your job, sometimes it might just be better to be quietly fired, and you learn from the experience of having been fired and don't do that again. Rather than have it attached to your name forever. But of course, then there's always the other side of that. That is it better? Do you want to err on the side of giving someone a second chance, or do you want to be the guy who was responsible for letting somebody go, who then goes on to do something worse? And I think a lot of people, that there's that factor too. So, and again, it's all because we're making this up as we go along, rather than there's a set procedure.
Well, but I feel like I swam us up to the surface of the water, and now by way of the film will swim us possibly back into the depths here. I'm going to tag in the final more or less coda of the film. If you haven't seen the movie, one of the workers has discovered the session 9 of the title is he's discovered this case file of this woman who I think in the timeline of the movie was 25, 30 years prior, something like that, who was had multiple personalities, and one of them that I think, correct me if I'm wrong, y'all, but Simon, he doesn't actually become an active present part of it until the very end. Like that's when or is he just whispering?
Well, it's an interesting thing with Simon, and I was going to actually mention this, that this is my question for you guys, which was about whether we felt that. But what I originally wrote was, is Simon literal or figurative? But and then what I changed it to is he real or imaginary? But I think the first version is probably closer to what I meant, in that she, like Gordon, she kills her family,
right,
and in her case deals with it by developing multiple personalities, completely denying what happened. And it's a dual defense where, first of all, nothing happened, on Christmas night 21 years ago. But if something did, it wasn't me. It was this guy, Simon, who was the real killer. And what's interesting about that is that the first time we hear Simon speak on the tapes, like, this one worker, Mike, he's constantly sneaking off. He finds these on the, I think the first day, these tapes of these sessions of the psychiatrist interviewing Mary's alters and trying to get them to say on tape what happened so that he can convince her and make her remember what she did.
Yeah.
And he needs to get Simon to talk, because Simon is the one who, so the implication is that Simon was the killer, is that the alter who actually wielded you did whatever happened. But Simon does not speak on tape until almost the very end of the movie, when the session 9 tape is played, and then comes out in this really creepy voice and is like, "Hello, Doc." And and Simon basically says that what happened on Christmas Eve is, Mary was playing hide and seek with her brother, and her brother Peter scared her and snuck up behind her and jumped at her, and she fell. She was holding a China doll, and she fell on the doll and broke the doll and cut herself very badly and got very mad and got very hurt. And the doctor said, "And then what happened, Simon?" And Simon said as well, "Then I introduced myself to her."
Yeah, God, so chilling.
And one of the things that's interesting about that turn of phrase is it's like it implies a prior existence. It's not like I came into being as the instrument of her rage. It's like, no, I introduced myself to her and I told her what to do. And that's what's also interesting, is that Simon does not claim to be the killer. He says, "I told her what to do, but she did it." I told her, to cut up Peter because Peter got a knife for Christmas. So she apparently took Peter's knife away and killed him. And then she killed her parents so that, so she was worried her parents might get bad. So I told her to kill them too. And,
Wow.
And this is the throwback to the first time we actually hear Simon speak is in the film, is actually much earlier. It's in the first 10 minutes when, David Caruso and Peter Mullen, who plays Gordon, are being first shown around the campus at this place. And they're in the A wing looking down the hall at this. It looks like a wheelchair, but it actually is a restraint chair that's used to move violent patients around. And it's just been abandoned at the end of this creepy, decrepit corridor. And there's light shining on it from this room. And this is the image on the poster, the movie poster. And what we don't learn until much later is that room that the light is coming out of is the room that Mary Hobbs was housed in. This is the A wing for the most dangerous patients. And Gordon is mesmerized by this, and the other two guys wander off. And then Gordon, as he's staring at this restraint chair, we hear the voice of Simon say, "Hello, Gordon." And he's introducing himself. And what's really interesting about this in terms of the timeline is, at this point, Gordon's family is still alive. Like, he hasn't killed them yet. What's going to happen is they're going to get the bid that, they're going to, and that's the other interesting thing about the first few moments of the movie, is that Gordon makes it very clear that, like, he's fronting the guy that he's responsible and he wants the job safe. But then when, he realizes the only way to get the bid is to promise that we can do this really quickly. He promised we can do a job that really should take 3 weeks. We're going to do it in a week. And even David Caruso is looking at him like, are you crazy?
Right.
Yeah. So he's playing fast and loose, but they get the bid and he goes home. He's got champagne and flowers. And it's at that moment when he should be celebrating that, I've saved the business. We've got the job that we needed to get to keep the business from folding. and then just something happens where this pot of boiling water gets spilled on him. He just goes off and kills his wife and kills his kid. And but all of that is like, that's still in the future when we first hear Simon speak. And so there's a straightforward version of this story where it's a story of two people with parallel descents into madness, Mary Hobbs and Gordon. But then there's this question, well, is there more to Simon? And like I suppose the most literal way would be that Simon is some kind of demon who attaches himself and possesses first this woman, and then is waiting for someone else to come along at the right moment and possesses Gordon. But there are also intermediary takes on that you could have. And I'm just curious what your guys' thought was about.
So I can answer unless you have something burning, Nathan.
Something burning, Nathan. Oh,
yeah, something.
Spill the pot of boiling water on me.
Oh no. So my take on it was that it was the last line of the film is Simon's voice saying, "I live in the weak and the wounded."
Yeah, it's a great line.
Yeah, wonderful. It's haunting in its implications retroactively to what it plays out. My feeling about this interpretation of it is that I did not take it as literal, to the sense of like that Simon is an entity that emerges opportunistically into people with this condition. But I did take it as a commonality among anybody who has been so severely weak and wounded that they are susceptible to those sorts of outbreaks, if you will. So I did not, and in fact did not even think about it until you raised your question of whether that might be a sort of spiritual presence. The film might call him a ghost or a demon, or if it was, some sort of otherness that sort of crept in and realizes like, oh, this guy, Gordon, is weak. Gordon is wounded. I'm going to seize hold of this. But I felt in my viewing of the film that it was more sort of the common experience that people had of, sort of a brokenness to their psyche, something that to what we're talking about, the coping mechanisms that people introduce to themselves to deal with what they've done. And this woman, Mary Hobbs, introduces this personality of Simon. And maybe for Gordon, it was, well, I'm going to paint a completely fictional narrative in my head. And Simon really, to Gordon, Simon is the background. He's, we don't even put together who this voice is that's talking to Gordon until it's all revealed at the end, when it's unpacking session 9. But obviously the session 9 of the title, Joel Anderson.
It's Brad Anderson.
Brad.
Oh, it's Brad Anderson. Yeah. Did Joel Anderson write anyway, I think there's another film that we're covering.
I think that's Hans Christian Andersen.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's a little match girl. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So he's, obviously he's titled this piece Session 9, and fundamentally I think the third act of the film, or the last, 10, 15 minutes of the film, are meant to be the Session 9 of Gordon for him, and where this all kind of unravels. So to answer your question more succinctly, I viewed it as a common ground, but not necessarily a literal other entity that seized opportunistically this thing, but rather just a common experience among the weak and the wounded. That was my take on it. Nathan, I don't know if you'd feel the same.
Yeah, well, I think it's a valuable question. And I think I'll echo you there, Matt. It's a powerful line. I mean, just an excellent bit of scripting that kind of punches you in the gut at the end. I mean, you're kind of like, oh wow, this is a real harrowing tale of these people and this guy's spiral here, and then that line happens. Like, oh, junk. Partly, I'm gonna marry some of what we've been talking about here. A podcast I was listening to recently, Richard Rohr. Listeners will know my affection for that personality, but he kept talking about the inherent dignity of people and how things like social media have a capacity to deny the inherent dignity of people and stoke our animus and judgmentalism of folks, which then denies them their inherent dignity. And so I think kind of grafting that idea here is and even intertwining that, at least attempting to, with these notions of self-forgiveness and in the face of transgression, however heinous. I think to me, what's scary and powerful about the line, "I live in the weak and wounded," spoken by another voice, and is that, to me, while Gordon is the tip of the spear in terms of manifesting these things, I think more or less all of the guys have a spectrum of indulgence of quote unquote weakness and quote unquote woundedness. And I think what can be disheartening, what can be troubling, what can be even debilitating about operating in the world we currently all operate in is we're told, conditioned that weakness and woundedness are defects and errors, and are things that are not just to be ashamed of, but are meant to be stifled, hindered, suppressed, when in fact that's just a part of the inherent nature of our humanness. That it's when we deny weakness, when we deny woundedness. And that's why I think the movie is really powerful from this standpoint of it villainizes that notion. It manifests it, because honestly, what I wrote down after that line, that is sort of meant at this point in our current conversation to be a bit rhetorical, is how hard is it for the two of you? How hard is it for me, marrying into this question, to tune out those voices? Because we have those voices. Like Simon, the sort of quote unquote character, is a metaphor in this heightened nature of this film. But I will be very confessional here. Probably about 6 months ago, in a moment that, and maybe it was pandemic related, and I'm just not charting my own sort of mental health well enough, but I had a very real bout of what I'll clinically call negative self-talk that really paralyzed me for a few days, and even just kind of being out of it was or walking completely free of it took a while, and took some confession with my spouse, and how foreign that was to me, to not to feel down or occasionally, depressed might be the wrong word there, but to just feel that negativity, and to have a Simon in my head, to put a finer point on it, to have a Simon in my own head saying, "You're not good enough, you are weak, you are wounded, and that is a thing for which to be ashamed." And those were new levels of experience for that. And so for me, I think we do a whole lot in our lives and in our world and in the mechanisms at our disposal to stymie, stifle, and deny our weakness and our woundedness, when, if anything, and by no means am I good at it, but we should walk with that, own that, be acknowledge it, live into it, because it's only in that smallness, that localness, that selfness, that weakness, that woundedness, that we're able to then, I think, sort of see the inherent dignity in everybody else. Like, I know my capacity, I know my limits, I know my frailty, I know, by virtue of knowing those things, can acknowledge and see that in you too, Matt, and you too, Reed, for whom I now can reduce my own willingness to judge that. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
no, it does. And I mean, it's true that you have to, that is the one other thing confession is good for. It's a way of letting somebody know, I understand why you did what you did, because I'm human too. And that is the one case where confessing something publicly, not as to place a burden on someone else to forgive you, but rather to lift a burden from somebody else and thinking they're the only one who's ever failed. I think can be worthwhile. So my answer to my own question is, I too come down somewhere in the middle, that I certainly, I don't think it needs to be a literal possession. It's more but it's more like a figurative. Simon is that potential in all of us to give into our worst side, and Mary's just literalized it, and obviously a version of Simon exists in Gordon and is eating away at him, even as he's desperately trying to salvage his business there at the beginning, and it follows him home. And there's also something that the actors talk about in the commentary and in the making of feature of this film, which is also, if you haven't seen it, it's worth renting the DVD just to get those extras, where they talk about the building itself really had a toll on them.
Yeah,
that is one of the ongoing themes of the movie is just sort of infection or possession. Like the whole thing, these guys work with asbestos, and that just a little grain of this gets into you and starts eating away at you over time, and it's like a time bomb. And same thing, that sort of just the knowledge of what these inmates had been through, or these patients had been through at the asylum. Like they talk about, like, this is where the frontal lobotomy was perfected.
Yeah. Wow.
So the physical location just gets under their skin as well. And it's one of the things that's another really evocative thing about the movie, is just I kept being blown away by the physical, the visuals of it.
Right.
Yeah.
There's something that, and maybe this will sort of unite everything in a way that gives us a launch pad towards landing home, or maybe it'll spark some more conversation. But that final line, "I live in the weak and the wounded," and there's a scripture verse that I think about often, and it's oft cited when Paul was talking about, Paul was writing about this thorn in his flesh. That's how he described it, and talked about how, like, there was this thing about him. Historians and theologians have argued and debated endlessly about what it might be, but the point being that he says in this writing in the scriptures that his response from the Lord was that the Lord's grace was sufficient, because his strength, the Lord's strength, was made perfect in weakness. And I'm thinking about wrestling with all of these notions of the ways in which we will deny ourselves these truths because we see weakness and woundedness as a defect, as a deficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And getting back to something, Matt, that you said near the very beginning, is how do we cope if we don't see a path for forgiveness?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we cope with what we've done, or, at the risk of being reducted, our weakness, our woundedness? How do we cope with that? Now, of course, Gordon in the film has done a heinous thing, and just an awful thing. Just egregiously wicked and volcanic in its damage to a psyche. But in a general sense, and we've talked frequently on the show about how it's actually winning the battles on the little things that position you to perhaps have some success at the bigger battles, that it's winning at the smaller sort of things that help you, condition you to face the bigger challenges. And I'm thinking just a little thing about, like, just understanding that your weakness and your woundedness does not necessarily have to define you, and it does not necessarily have to be the verdict on your life. The verdict on your character doesn't necessarily have to be something, talked about. I've always found it a bit silly, so forgive me, those of you who frequently exercise, where it's like, pain is weakness leaving the body, like that's the kind of the reductive thing, is like, experience the pain because that's weakness leaving the body and everything. And to me, I'm just, I think about all these things, and in a way that I hope will be coherent. I think about maybe part of what is at play when in the scriptures the Lord says back to Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you," is that, like, if I can be very, very presumptive and speak for God to Paul, which is a heinous hubris to try to embrace. But
yeah, go for it.
Sure, why not? It's the fear of God. So this is kind of what we do. My strength is made perfect in your weakness, in that I have a path to redemption for you. I have a path to forgiveness for you. That is not merely, as you had extrapolated earlier, exoneration. That is not merely, just excusing. I have a path to where your weakness and your woundedness, that when positioned in light of maybe authentic grace and authentic forgiveness, which God, maybe the three of us don't know, and maybe society at large certainly doesn't know what that looks like. But maybe if there were a hope and a path, that strength of being able to lead and guide into redemption, into holistic forgiveness, into holistic reconciliation, if that were possible, that strength would be made perfect through the weakness, not by denying it, not by pretending it didn't exist, but by openly acknowledging, like, this is our problem. And we look at things collectively. Society loves to feel superior. Therefore, society loves, and I say society, obviously it's made up of a bunch of individuals who just feel really good that they're better than X person or Y person, and they're better at doing whatever it is. I was reading just recently, I won't share the context, but I was reading just recently where somebody was talking about a creative exploration of a problematic thing. And somebody on social media had said, are they really qualified to explore that? And I remember I sort of bristled at that. Like, wait a second, you have to be qualified to explore something in a context that will, maybe, I don't know. And so the conversation for another time. But what I keep thinking about is the addiction or the compulsion or the need that we have to feel superior, when in point of fact, if we were all collectively able to embrace our own weakness and our own woundedness and be honest with ourselves about where we've fallen short, maybe we would stumble upon a path that would allow us to be a bit more advocating, perhaps, or at least understanding. And in the scriptures, I don't know the actual Greek word, but what is interesting is that there is a Greek word that in translation could either be translated as understanding or overcoming. And it has always struck me, well, I say always, as long as I've comprehended this, that, to understand something is to get on top of it. That if we are able collectively to kind of reach a path to where we can comprehend something and understand it, maybe we will have a fair shot at overcoming it. And systemically speaking, some of these things that people tear them down for, like sexist speech, racist speech, ideologies that are pervasive in our systems and in our societies, that we would perhaps rightfully point our finger at and say, thou shalt not do that. You should not, behave this way or speak this way or prop up this way. But maybe, and this is talk about a read bold statement, maybe we will never have a chance at ever getting over that as a society if we do not introduce a brand of collective understanding. Not necessarily something that absolves and exonerates all of the wrongdoers, but acknowledges our complicity in it and acknowledges the way in which we ourselves are also capable of heinous wrongdoing, capable of maybe more minor stumblings or whatever, and that maybe if we were willing collectively to reject the addiction to feel superior to someone and in point of fact engage the conversation with a bit more of a humble mindset, maybe we would actually have a shot at understanding it, and maybe, God willing, have a shot at overcoming it, as a result. Hopefully those thoughts made sense, but that's
it does. And I would say it's still a tough hill to climb, but I think getting a general sense of getting at least everyone to acknowledge that we are all human and prone to error is at least a somewhat less daunting task than getting us all to agree on which moral authority we want to follow.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. No, I absolutely agree. Well, I want to take the opportunity to, either to Matt or to Nathan, if there's anything about the film Session 9 or about this subject that's been itching and you've just been waiting for your turn to say something before we wind it down and go to our ranking meter. Is there anything that hasn't been brought up that we want to bring up before we kind of close things down from either of you? If we're good, we're good. But if not, then I want to give a platform.
I have many more comments I could make about the specific film, but I don't know that anything that it needs to be said. I think people will, should definitely check it out. If our conversation has intrigued you at all, it's a worthwhile movie to investigate. And it works on a lot of amazing levels, I think.
And Matt, I'm naming it so that I can claim it here. Listeners, a couple weeks ago we started this with Asia Schwarzentruber's afterthoughts on Rosemary's Baby. Last week, Candle Cove. Matt, if you got some more thoughts about Session 9 an afterthoughts article, I'm just saying, just putting it out there.
No, I will. I'm definitely come up with something to talk about. It's like my other goofy question that I wrote down, which I won't ask you to go into, but it was funny. I was like, my goofy question was, what would the sequel be about?
Session 10. Yes.
This is a movie
9.5.
this is a movie that should not have a sequel. But if Simon were to introduce himself to you and give you a big pile of money, what horrible sequel idea could you come up with? So maybe I'll write a blog post about that, but maybe not.
No, that's fascinating. So Nathan, do you want to introduce the fog meter?
Sure. Yes, the fog meter, our unique metric for how we express our appreciation for the films we cover, specifically under the language of fear, how scary a thing was, and God, how substantive a thing was. I'll start with fear, and then we can go to Matt and Reed. We'll kind of circle around that way, perhaps. This is my first time seeing it. Honestly, I don't even know that I'd heard of it. And so was kind of surprised to see familiar faces in it. So I'll say for myself personally, it was a pretty dreadful viewing, just because the tone is pretty dark. The energy is very heavy. And that, as I've already said, that gut punch of a final line definitely leaves you feeling like Gordon staring at the wall, like, I'm weak and wounded. So I think for me, I might give session 9. I'm not going to give it a 9, though. I had the impulse to just then. An 8. I'm going to give it an 8 on the fear factor. It definitely makes an impact. What about you, Matt?
I think I'd put it in roughly the same place, because it was just a wonderful buildup of dread. But there are a few films I could name that either made me much more uncomfortable to the point where, I recognized that they were good, but I had a really hard time finishing them because they just took me so far beyond my comfort zone. And there are also films that have done sustained terror in a way that, the kind of movie where you can't, you realize, why did I start watching this with the lights off, and
right.
This is not that kind of film. This is in the dread is there, the fear is there, but it's not. I never felt physically threatened or like that fight or flight response you get from a super scary movie. Its strengths are in other areas, and so I think 8 is about appropriate. I was fearful for my soul more than my
But
right.
But for a movie that doesn't traffic in a lot of like traditional, jump scare type conventions, Jeff in the tunnel was a lot.
That was
terrible.
That was my, that fits right into the sort of like, I could totally see. You go in at night alone. And of course, Mr. Obsessive Compulsive here, I'd be like, not only am I gathering up all these coins that I found, but I'm breaching around, making sure I've got them all before I can leave.
Yeah.
And,
all right.
Yeah. So that was wicked scary, that part for sure.
Very, very visceral.
But that's 45 minutes into the film, which is
right.
What's amazing. That is like the first 45 minutes. That's the first really unquestionably horrific event. So that's the other thing. This film just is not afraid to take its time, and it's not boring. Like the prior 45 minutes are engaging and there's dread, but it's like, it's not till like the middle of the movie that things start happening. And then and pace at the final part are like really, Well, and you're talking about Hank with the coins. I mean, even Jeff with the generator in the tunnel. Oh gosh, I'm sorry.
When he's running,
that's fine. Both
running
of those
away
are
from the darkness.
Oh,
right. Yeah. No, absolutely.
I mean,
so I'm gonna.
That's right, mullet head Jeff. I'm sorry.
That's right. No, that's right.
They both are impactful.
Yeah. I'm gonna up the ante here. Y'all went for 8. I feel like 8 is fair and appropriate, but I am gonna go for 9 on the fear factor, because I feel like
you're just being cutesy.
Perhaps a bit, but I
two glasses of wine.
2 glasses of wine. Take me to the airport. So it'll be a good time, I promise you. So but no, like I really felt for a film that, as we've stated multiple times, is not relying on jump scares, but rather on steadily ratcheting dread, and does so in broad daylight for much of its for much of its scene setting, is really very effective. And I feel like it's got the potential to get under your skin in the way that a film with this budget And with this premise and with this sort of first 45 minutes, as Matt pointed out, before anything sort of really terrible kind of happens, it's remarkably effective. So yes, I'm gonna go for a 9 on the fear factor. If you don't mind, I'll go ahead and pitch for the God factor, or basically how substantive the film is. And as I've mentioned before, I usually pivot this rating based on what I feel like the film has on its mind. And I feel like in some pretty subversive ways and subtle ways, the film really scratches at quite a bit. Maybe not to the degree that it would be, think pieces for every single person seeing it, but I think it has a lot on its mind. Obviously, we've had a conversation spawned from it that I've found very enlightening and challenging.
We've
in a lot
talked
of
less
ways.
about the film and more about the ideas that the film makes you think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to that end, I'm going to be kind of a bit generous with my God meter as well, and I'm going to give that an 8. So.
Oh, I thought you were about to do the 9 thing again. I was like, all right, Ray.
Well, don't judge me before I even spit my rating. Benefit of the doubt, Nathan.
Yes.
How about for you, Matt?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go for a 9 on that one. This is what I really should talk about in my follow-up blog post, though. Part of what fascinated me about it is, again, watching the making of and listening to the director's commentary, you realize how much of this is a film that really benefited from really good editing. That there's a whole subplot involving a homeless woman living inside the asylum that is cut from the final cut of the film, and I think the film is better for having left her out. Among other things, that in that version of the film, she kills him at the end, which I think is a mistake. I think leaving him alive alone in seclusion is a much more powerful ending. But
I agree.
But part of what just struck me about this is like, wow, you guys, I'm much more by the time I've written it down, I know the right answer, how the story should go. And the idea that you would go in and film and really not know exactly how it's going to end is like, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a sense in which I think they part of this was that they got really lucky. They made some good choices, but they also got lucky. They may have struck gold in a way they didn't fully realize. So that's where I'd probably give it a 9 rather than a 10, I think, because we may be seeing stuff that they didn't necessarily put there, or that they just lucked into. And I'll say too, the other thing, like when I was doing the likes and dislikes, which we actually never got to, my only real dislike of the film was a meta dislike, which was that after I saw this, I immediately went out and tried to find every other Brad Anderson directed film, and none of them worked for me the way this one does. There are a number that are very interesting, and I like the premises, but the execution does not affect me nearly so well. And again, I feel like it's like, maybe part of that is just in this particular case, he made some really good decisions in the editing that elevated it above what he realized he was doing, and he just never got there again, or at least not in the stuff I've seen.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. His other most prominent one that I'm aware of is The Machinist, which I like, but admittedly have only seen once. Like I remember it, but
yeah, that would be my second best of his pieces. I think it's effective, but part of it is I feel like the premise in that one, I knew what was happening right away, and I felt like I'd seen it done before.
Sure. Yeah. And it never bodes well for a film. And Nathan, I promise you're going to get your God meter, but it never bodes well for a film where what the most memorable thing about the film is the lead actor's physical transformation.
Yeah.
And that's what most people sort of zone in on about the film, rather than sort of elements, of the narrative itself. But anyway, Nathan, what's
hilarious about that anecdote is, if anything, The Machinist has always just been to me the funny story about how Christian Bale, when Nolan tried to pitch him to Warner Brothers, had lost too much weight for The Machinist, so that then they didn't initially buy him as Batman, and then he overbulked up. Funny story there. But for me, this is my first viewing with minimal extra textual material. I'm gonna land at a 7, which sounds conservative to where y'all were, but feels like, okay, I do think there's something here. To your point, Matt, I'm not 100% sure if the film knows what it's got, and so that's why I'm kind of erring towards the 7 a little bit.
Totally fair.
So Reed.
Yeah, so that means that we collectively give Session 9, written and directed by Brad Anderson, and 8 out of 10 on the fog meter, which I think is a pretty strong
I
showing.
feel
And
like
I think
if I gave it an 8, would it land at a 9? Because that would feel more.
no,
more
it'd have to go. It had to go pretty higher, but
Okay.
that's funny. So that's that, and I know like we've kind of been commenting about this by and large, but we'll just do a quick round robin of would you, and Matt, I'll start with you because I think this is probably a pretty easy answer. Is would you recommend Session 9 for viewers to check out?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. And how about you,
I,
Nathan? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
no,
off.
no, no.
Go
I'm
ahead.
just saying. I really hope we haven't spoiled it for you. But the truth is the fact that we talked so little about the movie itself and more about what it made us
Right.
think about. You know kind of what happens, but there's still gonna be plenty of surprises in there.
Absolutely, absolutely. What about you, Nathan? First time viewing, would you recommend Session 9?
Yeah. I mean, if anything, I was left a little more unnerved by it and thought, I don't know. I don't think there's anything baldly offensive to viewers, especially our listeners.
Right.
If anything, I think watch it, just get a blankie and a snacky.
One other point to make, just in case
Yeah.
anyone is wondering about this, like the murder of Gordon's wife and infant daughter. Part of a really smart choice they made. And this is another thing about the film. The sound design is amazing, which is ordinarily something I would not even notice, but we never see what he does. We hear it. And that is in many ways much more harrowing, but it wouldn't have worked visually. It would have been just too awful.
Yeah.
And
well, it's funny.
The fact that,
I was going to say, it's funny you reminding me of that, because I'm now remembering my experience of those last few minutes, because I'm not making this up. I really thought, oh, they're telling us it's David Caruso, until suddenly they were telling us it's not David Caruso very explicitly. Right. But that scene when Gordon's reliving those memories, that's when your heart just goes into your stomach. So yeah, to the question of recommendation, I do recommend it. I think our listeners would find a lot to appreciate about it. I think it's pretty dreadful. Just
it is.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But in terms of gratuitous graphic violence,
sure.
there is a little. There's certainly
Right.
that one scene which we won't go into detail about. But as far as you're not going to see the actual slaughter of his family, and a lot of violence is implied. It's more you see the aftermath, the wreckage of it, than
that's exactly right
happening.
Yeah, and it was remarkably restrained in that end, and I think to the benefit of the film's power. I think it's all the more, like we've unpacked, I think it's all the more powerful for it. I, of course, highly recommend it. I saw it for the first time back in the old college days when Nathan and I were at our alma mater, and this was my second time getting to see it, and I was pretty impressed with how much it still held up really well. And I feel like it's definitely a film that is remarkably accessible, which is surprising given its premise and what we've already explained about its underlying conceit. But it's a remarkably accessible film, and I think I do agree. I think our listeners would get a lot out of it. So that is our conversation about Session 9, directed by Brad Anderson. And first of all, I want to say, Matt, thank you so much for recommending this piece. And thank you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, actually. And it's funny, I had watched it so many times that I actually had to stop for a while because I knew it too well. So it was kind of a pleasure to go back, and I'd actually forgotten a few things.
Oh, that's awesome.
So it was good to have an excuse to do that and to reacquaint myself with it. So yeah, this was a real pleasure.
Awesome.
Thanks,
and
man.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been so delighted to have you back on the show again. You're just, consider yourself part of the Fog fam, because we just absolutely love it. So we'll do this again. And Nathan, as always, thank you so much for giving me the platform to sort of unearth my ideas and tell embarrassing stories about how I grew up on the way to the airport. That's also
welcome.
It's also great fun for me. So next week we are going to be continuing with another listener curated #WhatScaresUs film, another bit of an understated piece, which I love so many of these are. It's a film that I think a lot of people maybe have not had the opportunity to see, or maybe they've heard the title sort of drifting in the ether. I looked it up to confirm. written and directed by Joel Anderson. This is what I got tripped up by
Okay.
earlier. Written and directed
That's
by
hilarious.
Joel Anderson. It is the film Lake Mungo. And so next week we will be having a conversation about Lake Mungo, which if anybody is looking for a place, I think it's available on all the major outlets to rent. I think it might be streaming on Shudder right now. But Lake Mungo, written and directed by Joel Anderson, is our piece next week. So join us there. And as we say on every single episode, fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And in that spirit, we encourage you to fear nothing else and be on your way rejoicing. So again, thank you, Matt. Again, thank you,
Matt.
Nathan.
Thanks a lot,
Listeners, thank
guys.
you very much. And we'll see you next week. Okay.
See you guys.
Bye, everybody.
All right.